Jaclyn Smith was the angel who never left. Through 5 years of sudden exits, headline-making lawsuits, and a constant turnover of co-stars, she stayed smiling for the cameras, holding the show together. But in the autumn of 1977, just weeks into the second season, she filmed an episode that would leave a mark she never quite shook. It was called Angel Flight. On television, it was another glamorous adventure. Kelly Garrett, undercover as a flight attendant, unraveling the mystery of a murdered stewardess. But behind the camera, nothing felt like the show Jaclyn had signed on for. The cast was still reeling from Farrah Fawcett's abrupt departure. The press was circling like hawks, and every scene felt like a test she couldn't afford to fail. Viewers saw a polished hour of television. Jaclyn saw something else entirely, a week that carried the weight of friendships under strain, unspoken fears about the show's future, and the crushing pressure of being the last original angel standing. And more than 4 decades later, she still hasn't watched it again. In the autumn of 1977, Charlie's Angels was no longer just a hit television show, it was a cultural phenomenon. The first season had taken 3 unknown actresses and turned them into household names in less than a year. Farrah Fawcett's feathered hair was on posters in millions of bedrooms. Kate Jackson's sharp intelligence made her the grounded voice of the trio. Jaclyn Smith, with her calm elegance, brought a warmth that balanced the show's flash. Together, they were a perfect mix, at least in the eyes of the audience. But the image that America saw on Wednesday nights was already under strain. Behind the scenes, the first season had been grueling. The cast filmed long hours, often on location, in a production machine that moved too fast to allow for missteps. The workload was demanding, but it was nothing compared to what was about to happen. Farrah, the breakout star, announced she was leaving after only 1 season. The news didn't just surprise fans, it sent shockwaves through the production. There were legal battles, press statements, and a constant churn of speculation in the tabloids. Was she chasing a movie career? Was it about money? Whatever the reasons, the effect on the cast was immediate. Kate was openly frustrated. Jaclyn kept her thoughts to herself, but she knew the dynamic of the show had changed forever. For ABC, the priority was simple: keep the phenomenon alive. That meant convincing the audience that the Angels were still a team, even if one of them was gone. Behind closed doors, producers discussed everything from possible replacements to ways of reshaping the scripts. Jaclyn found herself in a delicate position. She was now the bridge between the show's past and its uncertain future. Farrah's departure also meant more screen time for Jaclyn. She was expected to carry storylines, front promotional campaigns, and represent the show in interviews. It was a role she accepted with professionalism, but it came with new pressures. There was no margin for error. If the audience didn't believe in the new version of Charlie's Angels, the show could falter within the year. Season 2 began with Cheryl Ladd stepping in as Chris Monroe, the younger sister of Farrah's character. The decision to make her a kid sister was meant to soften the transition. But Jaclyn understood that the public would be watching closely, not just to see Cheryl's performance, but to see if the chemistry could survive the change. On set, she tried to be welcoming while also navigating her own adjustment to the shift. The early episodes of that season had an extra layer of scrutiny. Every location shoot attracted photographers. Every interaction between the 3 actresses was dissected by reporters looking for signs of tension. Jaclyn was careful, always gracious in public. But privately, she knew that the real test of the season wasn't going to be ratings. It was going to be whether this restructured cast could make it through without collapsing under the pressure. By the time production reached the episode Angel Flight, the stakes were high. Only a handful of episodes had aired since Farrah's exit, and the new trio was still finding its rhythm. For Jaclyn, this was more than just another week on the call sheet. It was a moment that would come to symbolize a turning point, one she would never be able to watch back without remembering exactly what it felt like to be the last original angel standing. And when the cameras rolled on that particular shoot, she carried more than just her character's storyline. She carried the weight of an entire show's future. When Cheryl Ladd stepped onto the set of Charlie's Angels in the summer of 1977, she was stepping into one of the most closely watched roles in television. The network had chosen her carefully, not as a direct replacement for Farrah Fawcett, but as Chris Monroe, the kid sister of Farrah's Jill. It was a calculated move. Audiences might resist another glamorous blonde taking Farrah's place, but a younger sister could be introduced with affection rather than competition. For Jaclyn Smith, the adjustment was immediate and complicated. On one hand, Cheryl was warm, approachable, and eager to fit in. On the other, she was arriving in the shadow of one of the most publicized departures in television history. The press wasn't making it any easier. Headlines framed the new season as a test. Could Charlie's Angels survive without Farrah? The answer, it seemed, would depend on whether this trio could recreate the magic. The early days of filming revealed the contrast between the women. Cheryl was bubbly and energetic, ready to embrace the show's lighter, campier moments. Kate Jackson was focused on pushing for stronger scripts, trying to keep the detective work grounded. Jaclyn positioned herself in the middle, bridging the gap, smoothing over differences, and ensuring no disagreements spilled into public view. She had already learned in the first season that one careless remark could turn into a week of headlines. Yet even with her diplomacy, Jaclyn could feel the strain in the air. Farrah's exit had left more than an empty chair in the makeup trailer. It had shifted the balance of attention. Where once the spotlight had been shared, it now seemed to swing between Cheryl's fresh arrival and Kate's assertive presence. Jaclyn was used to being the steady one, but now she was aware that her own place in the show's identity was being quietly redefined. The producers knew they couldn't afford to lose momentum. Publicity photos were arranged to project unity. Press interviews were coordinated to show the women laughing together. Storylines were written to highlight each angel equally, at least on paper. But in reality, some episodes leaned heavily on one or two actresses, and the audience noticed. For Jaclyn, the challenge wasn't jealousy. It was the quiet burden of keeping the peace. She had friendships with both Kate and Cheryl, but they were very different personalities. Kate could be blunt, quick to voice frustration with the scripts or the grueling schedule. Cheryl tended to avoid conflict, but she was also determined to prove herself, sometimes stepping forward in ways that disrupted the careful balance Jaclyn was trying to maintain. As the weeks passed, the crew began to see Jaclyn as the unofficial glue holding the trio together. She stayed late to reshoot scenes if needed. She learned everyone's names on set. She was the one most likely to visit the wardrobe department after hours to make sure a costume choice fit the tone of a scene. These weren't the kinds of actions that made headlines, but they kept the show moving forward. By the time production reached the 4th episode of the season, Angel Flight, Jaclyn, had already navigated more off-camera negotiations than most actors face in an entire series. It was still early in Cheryl's run, and everyone knew that the chemistry of this episode would be judged as proof or failure of the new lineup. What Jaclyn couldn't have predicted was how that single week of filming would embed itself in her memory. Not because of the plot, but because of the way the set felt tense in the quiet moments, watchful when the cameras weren't rolling, and heavy with the knowledge that the entire season's future was riding on 3 women finding their rhythm under a spotlight that never dimmed. Angel Flight was scheduled early in the production order for Season 2, and on paper it had everything the network loved. A glamorous setting, a mystery with high stakes, and plenty of opportunities for action. The story followed Kelly Garrett, Sabrina Duncan, and Chris Monroe as they investigated the murder of a stewardess, going undercover as airline employees to catch the killer. It was the kind of plot that promised glamour and danger in equal measure. The bulk of the episode was filmed in and around Los Angeles International Airport. That alone created challenges. Every exterior shoot risked drawing crowds, and in the wake of Farrah's departure, every crowd included photographers hoping for a hint of drama between the new trio. For Jaclyn, simply walking to her mark meant keeping a smile fixed in place, aware that a single unguarded moment could end up splashed across a gossip page. Airport security also meant the schedule was tighter than usual. Scenes had to be filmed in carefully timed windows, with little room for retakes. Night shoots were added to capture the mood of certain sequences, leaving the cast and crew working long past midnight. By the third consecutive late night, fatigue began to creep in. Then there was the tone of the episode itself. Angel Flight was darker than many Charlie's Angels installments. Instead of lighthearted banter between stunts, the script focused on betrayal, danger, and a sense of loss. For Jaclyn, stepping into Kelly Garrett's shoes meant carrying that weight from scene to scene. There was no room for the breezy moments that usually helped balance the emotional load. The pressure behind the camera was just as real. Season 2 was still in its proving stage, and each episode was under scrutiny from both the network and the press. Ratings for the premiere had been strong, but everyone knew that audiences could drift if the chemistry faltered. Jaclyn understood this better than most. She was the through line between the old cast and the new, and she felt a responsibility to make the transition seamless. But that responsibility came at a cost. In one pivotal scene, Kelly confronts a suspect in a quiet airport lounge, pressing for answers while sensing danger. The intensity of the moment mirrored the atmosphere off-set, taut, watchful, and edged with uncertainty. When the director called cut, Jaclyn walked away from the set without speaking, retreating to her dressing room. She had done the work, hit every mark, but the strain of carrying both the role and the unspoken tension of the production was beginning to show. The crew noticed. Even the usually upbeat Cheryl kept her distance that day, sensing Jaclyn needed space. Kate, ever perceptive, checked in briefly but didn't push. For Jaclyn, the quiet was a way to keep the performance intact without letting the off-camera emotions seep into her professionalism. Still, the feeling lingered, a heaviness that made the set feel colder, the lights harsher, and the hours longer. By the time Angel Flight wrapped, Jaclyn had delivered exactly what the episode needed. On screen, Kelly Garrett was poised, determined, and in control. Off-screen, Jaclyn was exhausted in a way that went beyond the demands of the job. She knew she had given the show what it required, but she also knew she didn't want to see those moments again, not because she regretted them, but because watching would mean revisiting the week that had quietly taken more from her than anyone realized. The episode went into post-production like any other, but for Jaclyn, Angel Flight was filed away in a different category, not as a piece of entertainment, but as a memory she chose to keep at a distance. When Angel Flight aired in October 1977, it was well received by the audience. Viewers saw Jaclyn Smith in full command of her role, confident, intelligent, and glamorous, even in the grittier moments. The ratings stayed strong, and the episode was considered proof that Charlie's Angels could survive the transition from Farrah Fawcett to Cheryl Ladd. On paper, it was a success, but Jaclyn never watched it. Not then, not in reruns, not even when the network packaged it into syndication years later. For her, the episode had become something more than a 48-minute detective story. It was a time capsule of a week when the show's future felt fragile, when the unity the Angels projected on screen was being tested behind the scenes, and when she carried a private weight that no one else could shoulder for her. Part of that weight was the unspoken reality of being the last original Angel. With Farrah gone and Kate growing restless, Jaclyn understood that much of the responsibility for holding the show's image together now rested on her. She had to be the calm one, the diplomatic one, the one who smiled through every press call and answered every question with grace. Even small cracks in that composure could have been read as weakness by the press. And, in 1977, the tabloids were looking for any sign of trouble. The week Angel Flight was filmed was also one of the most publicly scrutinized periods in the show's history. Crews worked under the constant presence of photographers. Rumors about tensions between cast members appeared in entertainment columns. Every glance, every pause, every offhand remark could be twisted into a headline. Jaclyn knew it, and she worked twice as hard to make sure nothing from her could be spun into controversy. But that effort took a toll. On set, the mood was different from most episodes. The darker tone of the story, the late-night shoots, and the confined locations created an intensity that was difficult to shake between takes. Jaclyn later admitted in private conversations that some episodes were easier to leave behind at the end of the day. Angel Flight wasn't one of them. She carried the atmosphere home with her each night, and by the end of the week, the line between Kelly Garrett's determination and her own fatigue had blurred. Watching it back would have meant more than seeing her own performance. It would have meant revisiting the exact feelings she'd worked to move past. The uncertainty about whether the show could keep going, the quiet tension between personalities on set, and the pressure of living up to an image that was as much a burden as it was an honor. She didn't need to be reminded of the exhaustion in her eyes between takes, or the heaviness in her voice after days without rest. Jaclyn was never one to speak publicly about personal struggles. That was part of what made her so beloved. She protected the magic of the show for the audience. But that protection came at the cost of confronting certain memories. Angel Flight was one of them. It wasn't about disliking the story or the role. It was about what the episode represented in her own life. The moment she realized the job had become something much bigger than acting. For the viewers, Angel Flight was another polished hour of escapism. For Jaclyn Smith, it was the week she understood, fully, what it meant to be the last original angel standing, and why some memories are better left in the past. In the decades since Angel Flight first aired, Charlie's Angels has been remembered as a symbol of late 1970s television, glossy, glamorous, and unapologetically stylish. Its influence has stretched far beyond its original run, inspiring films, reboots, and endless homages. Through all of it, Jaclyn Smith has remained the constant, the face most closely associated with the original series. She is the one fans still turn to at reunions, the one journalists describe as the true angel. Her decision never to watch Angel Flight didn't diminish her career, nor did it tarnish her relationship with the show. If anything, it deepened her bond with it. She didn't need to see the episode again to know what it meant to the fans, to the network, and to herself. It was the moment she stepped fully into the role of carrying the series forward, even if that meant shouldering more than her share of its weight. Over the years, cast members have spoken warmly about Jaclyn's ability to maintain peace among strong personalities. Cheryl Ladd has credited her with making the transition after Farrah's exit easier than it might have been. Kate Jackson, despite their differences in approach, acknowledged that Jaclyn's steadiness kept the show from fracturing sooner. These acknowledgments reinforced what the crew already knew. Jaclyn wasn't just showing up to perform, she was holding the entire production together in ways the audience never saw. Her choice not to revisit Angel Flight became, in a quiet way, an act of self-preservation. Actors often speak about separating themselves from difficult projects, not because the work was bad, but because revisiting it would reopen a chapter of life they've already closed. For Jaclyn, that week in 1977 was a turning point, a time of transition, tension, and unspoken uncertainty about the future. Watching it would mean returning to all of that. Still, the episode lives on in syndication. Generations of fans have seen Kelly Garrett navigate the intrigue of an airline murder investigation without knowing the full story behind the scenes. To them, it's another example of Jaclyn's poise under pressure, her ability to make even the most heightened scenarios believable. And perhaps that's exactly how she wants it remembered, as a part of the show's legacy, not as a record of her own private struggles. In interviews, Jaclyn has often spoken about gratitude. Gratitude for the opportunity the show gave her, for the friendships it brought, and for the fans who still approach her decades later with memories of watching Charlie's Angels with their families. She doesn't dwell on the difficulties. She doesn't recount the conflicts. Her public image remains aligned with the qualities she brought to Kelly Garrett: loyalty, grace, and quiet strength. And so, Angel Flight remains unwatched. Not out of bitterness, but because some memories are more powerful when they stay exactly where they belong in the past, untouched and preserved in the mind rather than on a screen. The choice is hers alone, a reminder that even in the most public careers, there are private boundaries that deserve to be honored. In the end, Jaclyn Smith's legacy is not defined by the episodes she avoided, but by the way she carried herself through every one she filmed. Whether fans know the backstory or not, the truth is simple. She stayed when others left. She protected the spirit of the show. And she remains, to this day, the angel who never fell from grace. Jaclyn Smith has never been one to dwell on the past. She speaks fondly of her years on Charlie's Angels, remembering the laughter, the friendships, and the joy the show brought to millions. But every career leaves behind a few moments that belong only to the person who lived them. For Jaclyn, Angel Flight is one of those moments a week of her life, bound to memories she chooses not to revisit. For fans, the episode remains a polished hour of television, a testament to her elegance and quiet strength. For her, it is a sealed chapter, a reminder of the weight she carried and the resilience it took to keep moving forward when everything around her was shifting. It is proof that sometimes the greatest acts of grace happen not in front of the camera, but in the choices made long after the lights go out. Jaclyn Smith's legacy isn't defined by the episodes she's never watched. It's defined by the way she stayed when others walked away, by the steadiness that made her the most loved angel, and by the dignity that still surrounds her name. For more emotional stories, check out this video.